Medical examiners tell you what the cause of death was for William Concealment. Why is that? The reason the medical examiners can't tell you the cause of death is because Teresa Black left his body in a secluded area in the woods, in a place where he had no connections, no family, where people didn't know him, to rot, to be feasted on by animals, to decay. Never lose sight of that. That is why the medical examiners cannot give you a cause of death. And the defense wants you to ignore that very important fact. They want you to forget your role as jurors and give up your duty to determine what happened in this case and rely upon the experts who can't do their job because Teresa took the evidence away from them. You heard from the medical examiner, the defense's medical examiner, that their job is very different from a juror's. They simply look at a medical cause of death. Is there evidence where they can medically determine what the cause of death is? You're a jury, and you have a very important role in society. A very important role. You don't just look at whether there is a medical cause of death. You look at everything. That's the whole reason you're in panel. That's the whole reason each of you are chosen, to look at the entirety of the picture. You look at the circumstances of William being dumped in those woods. You look at the medical evidence that the experts are able to provide you with. You consider the fact that Teresa lied over and over again. You consider her relationship with William before she moved here. And you consider her behavior after he died. And through that lens, you fulfill this very important role in our community. And you alone make a determination whether Ms. Black is responsible. The juror's role is the conscience of the community. You represent our values. You are a voice of our victims. It is a special role, and do not allow the defense to distract you and take away that privileged role that you have. Do not simply look at what the medical examiner was or wasn't able to do, because you can do more. You sat here for a full week of testimony and heard all the evidence that we were able to bring. All the witnesses that are still around to tell you what happened. And it is through that lens that we ask you to make a decision on this indictment and the counts for which Ms. Black has been charged. You don't need to hate Ms. Black to do that. We're not asking you to hate Ms. Black to do that. But what Ms. Black did is wrong. What Ms. Black did is criminal. All you need to do is to think about William and what happened to him and determine if she is responsible. And over the course of the trial, we have shown you that she is, through the evidence. And each little piece of the puzzle, in and of itself, is never going to be enough. Certainly not in a case or the defendant has destroyed evidence. But you're not required to give her a pass because she was able to do so effectively. You can take her actions into account. In order to determine this case, we need to walk through the evidence that you've been shown through the course of the trial. And let's do so in an orderly fashion. Let's start from the beginning. You heard that on June the 23rd of 1992, William Deshaun Hamilton was born to Teresa Ann Bailey, now Black, and William Harris Hamilton in Mecklenburg, North Carolina. You heard that in November of 1995, Teresa's mother passed away. You heard from multiple witnesses that between the time that William was born and her mother's death in November of 1995, that there was a 2-year period that Teresa was not in her son's life, that her parents were taking care of William, and that he was with them. In December of 1998, William is withdrawn from school. In 1995, when Teresa came back into William's life, she befriended Ava. And from 1995 until December of 1998, they spent a lot of time together. That's about 3 years. And you heard Ava's observation of that relationship. You heard her own observations of Teresa, the kind of life she was living. She had a good life in North Carolina. Teresa had a job, working for one of the biggest uniform distributors in the country, Earmark. She had a home that she could live in. She had family and friends. Her son's paternal side of the family was nearby. They had a whole network. And then suddenly, as you saw from the records, on December the 1st of 1998, with not even a full day's notice, she decides to leave Atlanta. She tells Ava she's going to Atlanta. She doesn't know anyone there. She doesn't have a job lined up. She's excited. Ava doesn't even believe her. And the very next morning, she's taking off with a duffel bag and her son, and she's leaving. We know William was withdrawn from school on December the 1st of 1998, before the holiday break started. Whatever it was that enticed her to Atlanta was something that happened quickly. It was exciting. It was interesting. And she pulled her kid out of school and she left right before the holidays, before the break. And you know he attended school up until December the 1st of 1998 because he attended 62 days of his first grade school year. We know school starts in the fall. And by December, he would have attended 62 days of school. So he was in North Carolina until he was withdrawn on December the 1st of 1998. He was in the first grade. He was 6 years old. Teresa was 21 years old. 21. This isn't a teenager. This isn't a child. This is someone who's already had to grow up fast, who is raising a son, who has a job, who's paying bills at her father's house, who's paying for daycare for her son. This isn't some foolish child. This is an adult. And this 21-year-old ups and decides to move to Atlanta. She moved to Atlanta for a more exciting life. She was bored with this humdrum life, living at her dad's, going to work at a boring job, not much going on in Charlotte, North Carolina. She moved to a bigger city. We know there's no way she uprooted and left all of this behind for nothing. She didn't just do this to go, move from hotel to hotel. She came for something. And she had some money when she got here. And you heard in her own statement that initially she was staying in hotels. You heard from Ava that she received a phone call from Teresa shortly after she got here, about a week. And she made friends with some women. And they were partying. And Teresa sounded intoxicated. And she didn't have William. The idea that this woman didn't have identification is ridiculous. So you're telling me that you've enrolled your child in school in Charlotte, North Carolina. You're paying taxes. You have a job. You're buying alcohol and hanging out with your friends, and you don't have identification? She comes to Atlanta. She's staying in hotels. You have to have identification to rent a hotel room. She's drinking. She's partying. Of course she had identification. That's absolutely ridiculous. Teresa came here with her North Carolina identification, and she started working in the club, and she made some friends, and she was having a good time. And she was 21 years old, and this was better than Charlotte, North Carolina. By February the 26th of 1999, not even 3 months later, William's body is found in a secluded area of woods in DeKalb County, in a location Teresa has no connection to. None. She's just gotten here. She doesn't know anyone. You heard from Ava that he was found wearing the clothes that he left in. William didn't make it long in Atlanta. He's wearing the clothes that he left in. Within a week, Teresa can't even put him on the phone to talk to Ava. She doesn't enroll him in school. His body was almost completely skeletonized. This is the late fall, early winter. This isn't a hot Georgia summer. These are cold temperatures. And you heard from the medical examiners that that would take 3 to 6 months. This poor child didn't make it long in Atlanta. And despite all the media attention, this case has gotten over 20 plus years. The outcries for help to the community, the newsprint, the television coverage, the podcast, the organizations, the tip lines, not one person in Atlanta has ever come forward. Not back in 1999 when he was found, when they're holding memorials for this child, when the governor is offering rewards for information. Not one person has ever come forward saying they met this child, that they saw this child in Atlanta. And that's because William wasn't around very long. That's because William died shortly after he got here. He didn't even have a chance to go to school. He didn't have a chance to meet anyone. He didn't have a chance to make connections. The defense wants you to believe that Teresa came to Atlanta fell on hard times pretty quickly and chose a life on the streets with her son. Chose to go from parks to dumpsters for resources, shelter, when she had so much nearby. And it makes no sense. It's just not true. It's an after-the-fact fabrication, one that, quite frankly, was fed to Teresa by Lieutenant Quigley. You heard from the get-go. He gave her out. He gave her out. I wonder what you would have said if you'd been forced to explain on your own. But she took that story of a mother who fell on hard times that Lieutenant Quigley provided her like a life raft. And she used it. But the problem is it is discredited by the evidence, by the people who knew her and her circumstances. Teresa had a home in Charlotte, a nice home. You heard from Ava that the rent was paid up for 4 months when Teresa gave Ava the key. Teresa could have come home to Charlotte, to her home, filled with all her furniture, where William's bed was, where he could sleep at night, protected and sheltered. She had 3 brothers and a sister. She had a father. William's father's family, little William, lived in the same neighborhood. And you could tell they loved him. You could tell they wanted to see him. They had been seeing him until Teresa came back in his life. Slowly that changed. Teresa didn't want a relationship with William's father's family. She didn't want them in her life. It wasn't that they weren't there for her. She pushed them out. She had no interest in any relationship with them. But they were there. They were there. And they had expressed interest, and they continued to express interest. And they were options. She didn't choose to live that way in DeKalb County when she had all of this. William had his paternal grandmother, Margaret, who you heard took care of 6 of her other grandchildren at one point or another. His Aunt Wanda would have taken him. William had Ava. She told you herself that when Teresa decided to leave suddenly in this fashion, that she offered to take care of William until she got settled. And Teresa called Ava within a week of getting to Atlanta. And she never picked up the phone again. She could have. She could have easily called Ava. Ava and Miles both had cars. They could have come and gotten her and brought her home if that's really how she was living, if that were actually true. She would have called Ava and she would have asked for help. And Ava would have come and gotten her. Charlotte is not far away. Charlotte is not far away at all. And if it were true, which it's not, there were shelters in Atlanta at the time. See, unlike now, where we've basically gotten rid of all of our shelters, there were working, functional shelters in the 90s. I don't know if you remember, but that was right after the Olympics and the big push to clean up the homeless population for our big expose to the world. There were lots of services back then. And you heard about that shelter. You heard about that shelter from someone who worked there back then. It was a place where you could get breakfast, lunch, and snacks, where you could get medical treatment, clothing, help finding employment, They also worked with the night shelters in the area where there were multiple. There at the night shelter, you could have dinner. You could have snacks. You had a bed to sleep in. But there was a caveat. You had to show up by 5 or 6 p.m. You had to be there within the curfew. And that's going to be problematic for someone like Teresa, who's working in a nightclub. It's as simple as that. She can't make money and take her son to the shelter. It's one or the other, and initially, Teresa's priorities were making money in the nightclub. If all else fails, you heard that there is a task force set up. You don't make curfew. They've recognized that a lot of women who are suffering from homelessness and housing insecurity might be working these kinds of jobs. And they try to dissuade them from it. They try to help them with other resources. But worst case scenario, they have a task force set up that will work with you after hours and help get you shelter. Help you find a place to lay your head down. And if that doesn't work, you can sleep in the lobby. You can sleep in the lobby outside or inside, protected from the cold. Ms. Black wants you to believe that instead she chose to ride MARTA for hours, just wandered into this random place in DeKalb County to which she had no connection, and just happened upon this maintenance path through the woods and laid down on the pine straw with her 6-year-old son to go to sleep for the night in the dead of winter. You heard from the neighbor across the street that at least a month or more prior to William's body being discovered, that something very odd happened in those woods. That a car pulled in. That he heard a door close and he realized that 2 people were getting into that car that had pulled way into the wooded area there in the cemetery. Something he'd never seen before. And then took off pretty quickly. That was Teresa and someone else disposing of William's body. Dumping him there in those woods. Hiding the evidence. Teresa told detectives that she believed she was staying in the Decatur area at the time. She also indicated she was working at Pleasers, all the way across town. That at some point she did utilize the Atlanta Women's Day Center, all the way across town in the other direction. And I think it's pretty clear from the evidence that wasn't until after William was dead. That wasn't until Teresa needed resources. It was when Teresa's life got out of control, when she burned through her money, when she didn't have a place to stay anymore, when she was using to excess, and she'd lost everything. That's when she turned to the day shelter. In June of 2022, for herself. She did it for herself. There's no connection to the Clifton United Methodist Church all the way on the opposite side of town again. These woods were a dump site. How do you know these woods were a dump site? She'd never been seen in the neighborhood. Bessie, who went to the church every single day, the church historian, has never seen Teresa. She never went to that church to ask for help. Certainly not after her child died. There aren't any businesses or homeless shelters in the area. Teresa, from her own statement, didn't recognize the name of the streets. Clifton Springs and Clifton Church. That's the intersection where these woods are located. Remember, Teresa didn't recognize those street names. But more telling than maybe anything is Teresa didn't realize there was a cemetery there. She didn't realize there was a cemetery there. You heard that in her own statement to the police. And the defense wants you to believe that when William passed, she laid there for a day or more, wandering around, not knowing what to do, and she didn't see this cemetery? It's nonsense. It's absolutely not true. She didn't see the cemetery because she was only there briefly at night to dump her child's body. She didn't know anything else about the area, and she didn't see anything else because it was late at night and it was dark. The defense has said over and over again that this child was well dressed for the winter. This child was wearing a shirt. This is a shirt. It's not even as thick as a sweater. It is a thermal shirt. This is warm enough to play during the day in the winter with your friends on the playground. It's not warm enough to sleep in the woods at night. This child wasn't dressed to sleep out there like that, exposed to the weather. You're not going to choose the outdoors in December, maybe even January, dressed like that. I can only imagine how a child would complain, how uncomfortable that poor baby would be. It's just not true. This child wasn't brought there to sleep that night. The medical examiners back in 1999, when this child was discovered, were able to perform an autopsy. And they weren't able to come up with a cause of death. Because as we've already discussed, most of the evidence that they would rely on had been destroyed. The skin to show evidence of injury. The organs to look for disease or trauma. The blood to check for drugs, both of the legal and illegal kind. That was all gone, with the exception of some muscle tissue below the knee. But it wasn't all gone. All the evidence was not lost. In that muscle, through toxicological screenings, they were able to determine that this child had been exposed to acetaminophen and diphenhydramine. Acetaminophen and diphenhydramine, as you've heard, is common in over-the-counter medicine like Tylenol PM. There are some other brands that are exactly the same dose, the same warnings, the same everything. But it's typical of those nighttime sleep-inducing pain medications. It's for adults to assist with pain and to induce sleepiness. And we know this was administered shortly before his death. All the experts agree. What you know from this is that Teresa gave her son sleep-inducing drugs. She gave her son adult sleep-inducing drugs. You have to look at the big picture here. Teresa is new to Atlanta. She doesn't know anyone. She doesn't have money to pay for daycare. She admits that She wasn't using shelters in the beginning. That's in her statement. She was working at Pleasers. She could not bring William to the club. The manager told you that. Children were not allowed in the club. No one has come forward to say that they took care of this child while Teresa was working. And if you think there was someone that could have, I promise you, they would have been brought. If someone could say they looked after this child for Teresa, I promise you they would have been brought. In her statement, she said something very telling. When they are asking her, where would William be when you were using? She said, sometimes William was with her. Where was he when he wasn't? Who was looking after William when he wasn't with his mother? Tylenol PM. Tylenol PM or some other brand of the exact same thing was looking after William when he couldn't be with his mother. You heard that Tylenol PM has warnings. Do not use in children under 12. Severe liver damage. Overdose may occur. All over the packaging. And this is for adults. This is for adult medication. Tylenol and Benadryl haven't changed over the years since 1999. You know that. All of you have been using it all that time as well. That's ridiculous. We have known about the side effects and how to use Tylenol and Benadryl, and the human body hasn't changed and somehow started to metabolize it differently that would require new packaging. This is a known quantity. It was a known quantity back in 1999, and the drugs had the same warnings back in 1999. And I can promise you, if they hadn't, the defense would have asked about it. The defense would have asked those experts, and they would have brought you the different packaging. Because they have the same subpoena power of the state, the same right to examine witnesses and cross-exam and cross them as the state. They have no burden of proof. The burden is on the state. They can say nothing. But when they choose to exercise those rights, and they don't bring it to you, that means it's not there. Because there was no change in the packaging. Now, there are children's formulas of these medicines, but you heard that they're packaged in separate medications. They're not going to be in the same product. So what you'd have to believe is that Teresa, who says she doesn't have a place to stay, who's living in parks, who can't afford to buy her child food, can buy 2 separate bottles of children's medication? And that's how he ended up with both in his system? That's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. The children's medication has the same warnings. Do not use to make a child sleepy. Keep out of reach of children. Overdose warning. Contact poison control right away. A dose of children's diphenhydramine is just a quarter of what an adult gets. And a dose of children's acetaminophen is less than a sixth of what an adult gets. There is a liver warning on the children's bottle, and it says a max of 5 doses in one day. 5 doses in one day is less than what would be in a single dose of that adult sleep-inducing medication. That adult sleep-inducing medication that you know he was given shortly before his death. And Teresa lied about it. She lied about it. You heard her statement. I know something was wrong. She was explaining his symptoms. He wouldn't want to talk. He wouldn't want to get up. He just didn't want to do anything. He was not throwing up, like gagging, just lethargic, weak, and tired. This child didn't have food poisoning. Let's not forget that the defense's own medical expert, who's done over 400 autopsies of children, has never seen a child death from food poisoning. We all have had food poisoning. You are going to have vomit or diarrhea or both, and it's terrible. There is no second guessing when you have food poisoning. A child that isn't vomiting and doesn't have diarrhea did not die of food poisoning. You can check that off the list right now. Teresa lied about these drugs. She didn't admit to giving them for a reason. She wasn't honest with the police because she knew why William had died. She said, I gave him, I don't remember, it wasn't liquid, it was a lozenge. There weren't any lozenges with acetaminophen and diphenhydramine. If there had been, they would have been brought. A lozenge doesn't exist. She said, I think I gave him that. I don't know if I had any cough syrup. And then they asked her a bit later, it was mostly because it was the only thing I had to eat. But he wasn't coughing a lot, so I didn't have any cough syrup or anything like that. I didn't give him anything like that. I just thought he wasn't getting enough to eat. The most Teresa would admit to was that she gave him a lozenge to eat. A lozenge to eat. Teresa withheld medical treatment without a doubt. There is no conflict in the evidence. She said she knew what was wrong, that she knew something was wrong, that she knew something was wrong for days. She just thought the child wasn't getting enough to eat. She said, I knew I should have done something. So this wasn't a situation where the child unexpectedly dies and you're like, oh my God. She knew she should have done something and she didn't do it. She knew she should have done something because William was sick enough that she recognized that. William died a preventable death. You heard that from all the experts, that he could have suffered from a toxic exposure to either or both of these drugs, that a death occurring as a result of a toxic exposure would have caused him to suffer, to feel pain, and that toxic exposure to both medications could be treated. It can be treated. And Teresa knew something was wrong, and she didn't do anything about it. That's what this case is about. It's about William and the failure of his mother to protect him. Why? Why did Teresa fail to protect William? You heard from Dr. Gonzalez, the overdose expert, that people don't take their children to the hospital when they have given them drugs in a non-therapeutic manner. When they either give them illegal drugs or they give them over-the-counter medications in a way they shouldn't have, they don't take them to the hospital because they'll get in trouble. That's why she didn't take him to the hospital, because she would get in trouble. You heard from Dr. Tice that it's difficult to fracture this area of the skull. You're more likely to fracture a little higher or a little lower, and that this type of fracture is common in abuse cases, the kind that William suffered, the fracture that had no evidence of animal activity around it. And Dr. Gonzalez told you it's not uncommon to see blunt force trauma in child overdose deaths. So they often present together. Dr. Gowett told you that in unexpected death cases, the family is dying to know what happened. They're beating down the door. You know that. You don't need Dr. Gowett to tell you that. When a child dies unexpectedly, it is the most terrible thing in the world to a loving family. And that family wants answers. And they want to know why they have lost their loved one, their baby. But in fatal abuse cases, it doesn't hear from them very much. Because they already know why the child died. Because they're in cover-up mode. Because they don't want to get in trouble. Dr. Turner herself, this expert that the defense had to go to Missouri for, they had to go find a paid doctor that they could fly in here from another state. For some reason, I'm still not entirely sure why. She agrees with the experts that his symptoms would be consistent with a toxic exposure to the medicines. She agrees we can't determine a cause of death. And Dr. Turner said she has never worked a case where a child has been abandoned, a child death, and they've been abandoned that wasn't related to abuse. Because it doesn't happen. She's been working for decades. Dr. Gowett has been working for decades. People don't abandon their dead children's bodies unless they have something to hide, unless they have something to cover up. After William has died, after his body is discovered in the woods in February, Teresa doesn't leave. She doesn't go home back to Charlotte. She stays here. You know she stayed here because on June the 23rd, William's 7th birthday, she goes to a DMV in Georgia and gets an identification card. That's her face on her 7-year-old's birthday that just 4 months prior was found decomposed in the woods, that the community is searching for. That's her face on the anniversary of his birth. By roughly December of 1999, Teresa has returned to Charlotte. And here begins some more cover-up. First, she lies to Ava about William. Tells all sorts of stories about how he's with his father's family, godparent. Then she lies to William's father's family about William. And in 2002, you heard from Investigator McClendon that it was confirmed that there was a child support case between Teresa and her child's father, William Harris Hamilton, after she knew he was dead. Teresa then moves to Alaska with her new husband, Laquise Black, in 2005 and continues lying. She was so bold as to find some teenage boy and put him on the phone with her husband and pretend to be William. Those are the lengths this woman will go to lie to people, to manipulate her circumstances. She then lied to Wanda in 2017. She doesn't just say William's alive and in Atlanta somewhere. He's got kids. Now he's got kids. This isn't someone who feels remorse. And then on February the 15th of 2022, she lied to the police. She lies to the police. She doesn't even mention she's ever lived in Georgia. She doesn't even mention she has a son. And it's not until they tell her they're from Georgia. Yeah. No, I do have a son, actually. And then we have to listen to all these lies about how she left him with some woman she met in Atlanta. The crocodile tears. He's dead? No! 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 It was all lies. All lies. And those tears were for herself. Those were tears for Teresa because she was scared she was in trouble. All that time that Teresa was lying and covering up what had happened to William, law enforcement never gave up. This child, while he may have been unidentified, had a special place in the hearts of this community, at the medical examiner's office. While he might not have had a special place in his mother's heart, at the medical examiner's office, they named him Dennis. And they pursued every lead they could, having artistic renderings done, having clay remodelings done, reaching out to the community. This child was never forgotten. And there's a reason that his case was so special to everyone involved. Because what happened to him was so touching. See, there's a very fundamental truth at play here that I don't have to tell any of you. And that's that people who love their children do not abandon them in the woods to rot and be feasted on by animals. It does not happen. Even if you believe that Teresa merely woke up and found her son dead beside her, the act of walking away, leaving him in that secluded wooded area where he was not found for almost 3 months, is concealing his death. That act alone is concealment. The defense would have you believe there needs to be some affirmative act. She needs to sprinkle him with pine straw. She needs to cover him with dirt. She needs to move his body. That's not what's required under the law. You have to find that she concealed his death, and that concealment prevented law enforcement from discovering what happened, and that is exactly what happened. She effectively concealed this death for almost 3 months because he was left in a secluded wooded area that people didn't go in. He was concealed. And law enforcement were hindered. By the time they got to him, his body was severely decomposed and much of the evidence was gone. Teresa was successful for a long time. she was able to hide the evidence and to muffle this child's voice. His ability to speak from the dead about what had happened to him. But William did speak. William spoke to all the angels in this case. The doctor who found the drugs in his body. The artist who created his likeness and broadcast it to the world so that hopefully someone would recognize him. And to Ava, his biggest angel of all, that woman who, when she realized he was leaving, grabbed hold of that child, stared him in the face, and repeated her name over and over, told him to repeat his, so that her face and her name would be seared into his memory and he would never forget her, as he seared his own name and face into hers. And Ava did find him. William spoke one final time through that computer screen to Ava. And the case broke open. William was found and identified. He was given his name back. And now he has been speaking to each of you. In the course of this trial, William has been speaking to each of you. And the time has come for you to be his voice. The time has come for you to speak for William and to say what we all know, what we all feel deep in our hearts and in our guts. That Teresa Black is responsible for his death. That Teresa Black failed her child. It is time for justice. It is time to hold Teresa responsible and to tell her something that she already knows, that she has known for a very long time. And that's that she is guilty of each and every count. Thank you.